You are listening to Revenue Insights. Today, I've got a special episode for you. Over the past month, we have analysed over $54 billion worth of revenue. That constitutes over 4.2 million opportunities, over 1 million hours of sales conversations from over 530 companies. We've done our usual process of trying to understand where sales teams are and how sales teams were performing over the past 12 months. And this year, we've taken particular interest in trying to understand what attributes are separating top performers from the rest of the team. So this episode covers a lot of our findings and was originally recorded as an early release at the Pavilion CEO Summit in Scottsdale, Arizona at the end of January. We've since come out with a full report that I'll put in the show notes below, but figured people enjoy digesting the findings in different ways and different formats. So we're re-uploading the episode here for everyone to enjoy.
Let me start by saying, wow, what an amazing event to have everyone here today. And a huge thank you to Kathleen and to Sam and the whole Pavilion team for creating this environment where we get to get together once a year and do this together. So it's almost twice as many people this year as last year. So I want to start with a quick round of applause for the team that put this all together for us. So thank you. Thank you for helping with Sam. It's been excellent. So today I'm going to be talking about our 2024 Benchmark Report, which we put together with Pavilion. This is following the 2023 report, which had an incredible amount of attraction. We had over 3,000 companies download the 2023 Benchmark Report, and the feedback we got from the community was incredible. My team reached out to everybody as best as we could, asking people what they wanted to see more of. And today I'm going to walk you through a sneak peek of what's in the 2024 Benchmark Report. And at the end of the presentation, there's a QR code that if you want to, you can register to download a copy and you get early access. So before we jump into the 2024 numbers, let's remind ourselves of where we started, what happened last year. So the last time we ran the numbers was in the summer. So this was based on the first half of 2023. And there were some positive signs. We were seeing some green shoots. We thought the market was starting to pick up and in our favor. We saw win rates increase, sales cycles reduce, and average deal values were going up. However, that didn't tell the whole story. We saw that only 27% of reps were hitting quota in the first half of the year. We saw this delta between the top performance and the rest of the sales team started to grow. So the year before, it was about 4x. We at the beginning of the first half of 2023, we saw that grow to 6x, with just 23% of the reps now generating over 80% of the revenue. And that was really an interesting delta that we'd never seen before. We also saw more deal slippage than we'd ever seen before. Nearly 40% of opportunities that we analysed had slipped past the predicted close dates, which again was higher than we'd ever seen before. So when we jumped into this year, we wanted to analyse more data than we ever had before. So this year we analysed 4.2 million opportunities, which represented $54 billion worth of revenue. Now, the data came from over 500 businesses, all very fast growth B2B and B2C software businesses. We also analysed for the very first time over 1 million hours of sales meetings. So these are calls that were recorded in either Zoom or Teams, and we analysed all of the signals and all of the objections that came out from the calls. The very first time we've ever done that piece of work. So some fascinating insights. Now, if you're all still here and haven't slid your wrists off the back of the initial presentation, that's a good sign. But the reality is we are facing headwinds as we enter 2024, okay? And the data that we're looking at, it really is quite stark. So while we thought we saw those green shoots the first half of 2023, as we ended the year, what we found is that win rates had dropped dramatically. Again, deal values had dropped and sales cycles had started to increase again. So while we thought we had those green shoots at the beginning of the year, things actually got very tough at the end of the year. We also saw the percentage of reps that were missing quota was at 69%, and nearly half of deals had slipped in the second half of the year. Again, highest number we've ever seen before. But the shocking number for me that was this middle delta point here, the velocity delta between these top performers and the rest of our sales teams. That delta growing and the top performers just going further and further into the distance away from the rest of the sales team it was really quite shocking, actually. And we're going to jump into those numbers in a lot more detail today. So what can we do about it? What do we do? How do we change this dynamic? How do we win in a bear market? Well, what we know is in bear markets, there's a lot of companies that don't do well, that can suffer very badly. But there are a few that do it the right way and they clean up. Okay, so how do we make sure we're on the right side of this world? Well, as we've already talked about this morning, we know that this idea of growth at all costs is whether it was real in the first place, I'm not sure, but it's gone. So this brute force approach, so if it costs 5 to achieve 1, well, then let's spend 10 to achieve 2. This approach to just throw money at the problem and it just doesn't matter. That can't continue, and it won't continue moving forward. And when we look at what that impact had on our sales teams, we saw the tenure of sales reps reduce quarter after quarter. The percentage of reps that were moved on, we'll talk about a little bit later, but we can't continue to do this to our sales teams. Okay, we need to start investing in our AEs because they're not the problem. Okay, it's the way we're coaching them and supporting them that is. So the new way is to really get under the skin of what the best of top performers are achieving. Why are they doing better than everybody else? What are they doing differently at every single stage of the sales process? How can we understand what's driving their behavior to achieve those outcomes? And then how can we replicate that across the rest of our sales teams? That's how we win, and that's how we can do a whole lot more with less. So we still have a problem with quota attainment. Now, those eagle-eyed of you will notice that I suggested at the beginning that quota attainment was down to just 27% of reps were hitting quota attainment, and now it's down to 31%. So that's surely moving in the right direction. But actually, the numbers actually tell us something slightly different. In reality, in the second half of last year, the quotas being set were 19% lower for our reps. So the fact that 69% of the reps still miss quota is really quite scary. And when we look at the data, if we hadn't reassessed, if we hadn't reset the quota numbers, that number will be closer to 79%. We also saw this gap between the top performers and everybody else really grow, with just 17% of the reps now generating over 80% of the revenue for our businesses. Now, that's not healthy for our business. It's also not healthy for the sales team. We find ourselves in a position where we're almost at ransom to these top performers. Okay, it's not a black art. Okay, these people are following a process in a way, they've got an instinctive way of doing things. But we need to learn. We now live in a world where all the data is available to us. We need to understand what they're doing, and we need to help the rest of our teams replicate that behavior. When we looked at the data, only 15% of sales teams had over 50% of their reps hitting quota over the second half of last year. Okay, the numbers really are quite stark. And the turnover of sales teams increased dramatically. Up to 36% of the sales teams were churned last year. This is the highest numbers we've ever seen. We've been doing these reports now for 4 years. Now, a lot of us saw pipeline grow at the back end of last year. We saw that the volume of deals coming through the pipeline that was getting bigger, that the volume of deals coming in was good. The problem was that safety blanket wasn't real. That comfort blanket wasn't. We were going to sleep at night thinking, oh, it's okay, we've got a load of pipeline. But unfortunately, nearly half of those deals were slipping, and we weren't getting the close rates that we were expecting from the past. We also know that when deals start to slip, the close rates drop dramatically. And if they slip by more than 8 weeks, you might as well close them off as lost in more often than not. The win rates drop really dramatically. Now, everyone's running a different sales cycle and certain sales processes, but if your slippage represents more than 50% of your average sales cycle, the win rate drops by 90% when we're looking at that. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. I know it feels like there's a lot of negativity here. However, the answer lies in plain sight. If we're going to see that it's not just that the fact that the reps are missing their quota and half the deals are slipping, but the key to this is this delta between the top performers and everybody else. This cannot sustain. We have to start seeing those numbers come down. We have to start understanding what those top performers are doing, documenting it, and scaling it across the rest of the sales team. And that's our job as leaders, to help the sales teams become more successful, not just churn them out and hire another load, expecting them to achieve. So what are the attributes of the top performers? What are we seeing that the top performers are doing differently to everybody else? What I tried to do for you today is break that into the kind of 5 key stages of the sales process. So we're covering prospecting, qualification, solution propose, at the negotiation stage, and the close phase. And what I want to do is just talk you through what we're seeing in the data in the top performers so that you can take that home with you and hopefully replicate that with the rest of the sales team. So if we start at the top of the funnel looking at prospecting, the first thing we know is that not all leads are equal. Depending on where they're coming from, what the sources of them are, the top performers are able to sniff out the very best leads where they're working with. It's not appropriate if any sales rep has got less than 30% of their opportunities representing ICP. It's not good. We know that they have to be targeting the right companies. We know they have to be targeting companies with high intent. And we know that leads that are coming from certain sources have a much higher return, a much higher win rate. If your partner introduces you to the customer, then you're much more likely to close that piece of business rather than a cold outreach. So working the right opportunities is absolutely key, but also working with the right personas when you get into those opportunities is key as well. Now, one of the things that we've all had to kind of come to terms with is that the CFO or the finance director with it is going to be involved in almost like every buying decision. And the truth is, they're not our enemy. They want that return on investment more than anyone else in the business. They want that cost saving or that productivity gain or that increase in growth that you're promising. But get them involved in that sales process early, because the top performers are consistently engaging with those personas. Moving on to the qualification process, we've all heard of different, everyone's been talking about whether they're adopting MEDDIC, MEDDPICC, bands. SPICE is one of my favorites, and that's a little nod to Jacko if he's in the room. But what I wanted to do here is share with you what the differences are between the top performers in the way that they're qualifying opportunities and the rest of your sales teams. So first of all, it's worth noting that, as you can see here, that the difference in the qualification process that the top performers are going through is material. While everyone's capturing things like the pain points and the impacts of your solution on the company, only the top performers are going the extra mile and really understanding what that decision-making criteria is, or what that sort of event is going to be that's going to make this deal happen. And that qualification process needs to happen not just at the initial stage of the sales process, but all the way through the sales process. And we see that consistently. The top performers are consistently qualifying the customers through. And in fact, as we look at the data, we find that the top performers are closing lost opportunities at the discovery phase much more than the rest of the sales team. They're not wasting their time or the prospect's time if there's no real chance of them closing the business. The challenge with teaching qualification methodology, like any admin we give to our sales team, is that it's not easy for them to do. You can sit them in a classroom, you can tell them why they should do it. But then 3 weeks later, when we look at the data in Salesforce, we find that very few people are filling this data out. So how do we solve that? Well, the answer is through technology. So you can use now called AI technology that records the sales meetings that you're going through to automatically populate the MEDDPICC or the SPICE on your behalf. The reps don't need to do any work. We still live in 2020. In 2024, number one, we shouldn't be encouraging sales reps to be responsible for any sort of admin. And number two, we need to, thank you very much. And number two, we need to recognize that relationships still drive revenue in our markets. We absolutely need the sales teams to do what they're good at, which is building those strong relationships, building trust, building business cases with our customers. And we can allow the technology to do the admin, to take away that burden. And we can still capture the MEDDPICC and the qualification methodology as we go. So when we look at these million hours of sales meetings that we've analyzed over the last year, we can see a stark difference between the way the average performers are doing things versus the top performers. So when we look at the way deals are closed lost, the average performers are investing most of their time or suggest most of the deals are closing lost because they couldn't necessarily prove the ROI for the customer because they didn't have budget. It wasn't a priority. But the reality is they just weren't capable of building the right business case for the customer. It wasn't the fact that the customer didn't see it as a priority or didn't have budget. Believe me, if you can double the company's growth, they'll find the budget. The average performers really struggle to articulate the value proposition, and they lost the opportunities down to the lack of budget or wasn't a high enough priority. While the top performers are closing off opportunities because they couldn't prove the ROI to the customer, because perhaps the product didn't fit the solution that the customer needed. So the reasons why people are closing, the way they're dealing with their objections is materially different between the top performers and everybody else. And as we dive into the data further, we see that more and more of the objections are coming in earlier and earlier in the sales process. There's quite a long data on this one, but what we can see is that if you don't address those challenges early, the deals start to slip very quickly. Now, this is probably one of my favorites. When we started to really get under the skin of how the objection handling, one of the key differences between those top performers and everybody else in the sales team is the way that they manage those objections. So the average performers we can see here are really struggling with challenges around budget and priority in the early stages. While the top performers are on the other side, they're talking about ROI and feature fits, and they're tackling those challenges, and it's actually helping them progress the deals further. We also see in this graphic, what we're looking at is the difference between an average sales process for a top performer on the left versus winning a deal versus a closed lost opportunity. Now, the size of the bars tell you how long they're spending each stage. And there's some real interesting data points around the difference between those top performers and the way that they're performing, the pace in which they operate, the speed in which they're running through those stages, but also the number of stakeholders they're involved with. So the top performers are engaging with up to 9 stakeholders before they presented back the solution to the customer. While when we're seeing deals close lost, the number of stakeholders involved is materially low. We also can see that when meetings start to get cancelled, it leads to a lot of slippage, and that slips can grow and lead to close off opportunities. And if there's more than 7 days between progress on opportunities, if you're not engaging, it doesn't mean you have to have a meeting every 7 days. But if you're not engaging with the customer at least every 7 days, the chances of the deal closing one drops by 65%. So momentum is absolutely key, but also being multi-threaded with the customer is really important. So when we talk about closing, there's no silver bullet here. However, there's some key data points as to the difference between those top performers and everybody else in the sales team. We can see that the top performers are 3 times more likely to have completed that methodology. They know that that discipline works for them. So they go through that exercise. Are 5 times more likely to have really strong, high-quality relationships in the sales process. Twice as likely to self-source their own deals through the sales process. And nearly 5 times as likely to have the economic buyer engaged before they're presenting back the solution. We also see that they're 4 times more likely to update the opportunity every week and progress at pace. 3 times more likely to close an opportunity at discovery phase. The top billers, the top performers are not afraid to close off opportunities early, get them out of the pipeline at the discovery phase. There's no point holding on to them just for hope. And they're much less likely to lose the deal because of indecision. But look, not all of our sales guys are these rock star top performers. So how do we prompt the guys to do what we want? The answer is we use the data. Your top performers and the way that they operate and execute every sales process is the DNA behind what a good deal looks like. And we can use that DNA, we can use that benchmark to prompt the sales reps across the business on their own individual deals. And we can do it wherever they live. They can have it in Salesforce, they can have it in Teams. Here we can see in Slack, we've got alerts coming through where we're prompting them to say, look, you've been at this current stage for too long, or we haven't engaged with this particular persona. All of these can be done in deal rooms that are virtually created automatically for the sales teams inside whichever environment they're choosing to work. So to summarize, to replicate the top performers' behavior, number one, we need to understand what target accounts we should be going for. What does good look like? Which personas, which accounts represent ICP? And can we identify high intent accounts? Okay, really important that we're only targeting businesses that are really buying what we want to sell them. We need to be ruthless in the way we qualify our opportunities. These qualification methodologies work and it's consistent. It has to happen, not just at the initial stage. It's not a box ticking exercise. Well, I kind of know who the economic buyer is. It's fine. Let's keep going. You need to continue to use the qualification methodologies. And you're doing it to support the customer as well as the salesperson. We need to get better at coaching our reps to handle these objections. Objection handling was the key differentiator when we analyzed this 1 million hours of sales calls. The top performers give their customers comfort and confidence that they have understood their pain and that they're able to address their concerns or their objections as they come up. And actually, by dealing with the objections in a correct manner, you can speed up the sales process. But we have to teach the rest of the sales team how to deal with those objections. Being multi-threaded still works. Relationships still drive revenue. Measure those relationships. Understand how multi-threaded you are. What is there a difference between, if you're at the end of a sales process and you're not on texting relationship with your customer, there might be something wrong. And then finally, proactively manage these opportunities. Get them out of the sales process if they're not right. Can't believe we got through it at the time. So that's the presentation. That's a snippet of the insights you're going to find from the report. The report is available exclusively to Pavilion members for the first 2 weeks. So if you scan and register, you'll be sent a copy over the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much for all of your time.